this is a continuation explaining some of the features of the main tab of this tool. You also have the option of moving the focus based on just hovering your mouse over the base fuel table. You can turn that off or on with this switch here. So if you turn it off, you can hover over it and it doesn't change where you are in terms of the yellow focus here. Or if you turn it on, you can sweep through dynamically without having to click your mouse or anything, and take a look at different speeds or loads, or different slices at different speeds and loads. One of the things that you can also do is, since this is a VE based calibration, you have the option of choosing from different sources to evaluate the VE. You can choose as estimated by the ECU with its fuel flow and its O2 sensors. That's essentially how the ECU back calculates the VE. It takes its fuel flow and it multiplies it by its measured air fuel ratio to back calculate an airflow, and then that airflow is essentially normalized to VE by using the manifold density and engine speed. So you can plot the values here as estimated by the ECU. You can do it as estimated by the fuel flow and the AFR as measured by the cell. And this is an ex post facto fuel flow as well. So if you change your injector size or something like that, or your injector offset time, you can change that after the fact, and then not have to rerun the data if you use this after the fact fuel. You also have the option of using a throttle body based model for your airflow, and you can see that it doesn't have good resolution up here as you approach barometric pressure, but at the lower manifold pressures, the higher vacuum, however you want to look at it, that should be relatively trustworthy if you calibrate it, and I'll show you the tab for that in a bit. And the other option is, if you have a mass flow sensor and it's calibrated, you can use that as your airflow reference, which that's what I've done for this fit, which is why it seems to the line goes through the red dots better for the mass flow estimation than it does with the other ones. But you don't have to use VE. So if I turn off this option, and then let me just load a different calibration that's not VE based. So I'll go into custom cals here and just select an LS calibration here, and then let me turn on auto scaling on the y-axis so it makes a little bit more sense. And what you see here is the axes changed. Before it said volumetric efficiency, now it says fuel flow for both of these, and again you have different scales because of the fact that this is fuel flow versus map at a given RPM, 900 RPM, and this is fuel flow versus engine speed for that load. So that's obviously a very high load. If you change this, then that will change the source data. You can see there the effect of moving that around. And here's a good example of where you would want to increase the selectivity, because this is a pretty broad window here, from 35 to 42. So if you're looking at actually adjusting the map value or the calibration value, since you have enough data to visually understand the sort of trend there, I would make it more selective. That way, when you start actually moving your calibration data around, you'll not be in a wide band, you'll be in a smaller band. And the same thing here if you want to increase or decrease the selectivity. And this is fuel flow instead of VE, so there's going to be a constant positive slope, for fuel flow versus manifold pressure, and for that matter, usually RPM. One of the options you do have for if you're using fuel flow instead of VE is you have the option of compensating for AFR error. So what that does, if you want to be at say 13.1, but you're actually at 12.1 during the log, what it will do is it will adjust accordingly and compensate and give you the fuel flow that you actually should have been at if you were at the AFR target that you were wanting. And again, this is a calibration that isn't consistent with the engine that that the data came from. So that's why that there's obviously a lot of places where they're inconsistent. But this was just to show you that it doesn't have to be VE, and for that matter, it doesn't have to be map based, manifold pressure based. If you click on the alpha N, what it does is it transforms everything into TPS load. Now this is since this is a fuel flow versus manifold pressure calibration, let me load one that is oops, that's a DL. Let me back up. Let me load a calibration that's let's see, where would a good, tell you what, I will load a 5.7 Hemi calibration that is an alpha N. Okay, so you can see that, interestingly enough, your fuel flow versus TPS is surprisingly consistent with high manifold vacuums or low pressures. So if you go down to lower TPSs, what you see is there's more or less a flat line once you get into choked flow, but on the TPS or fuel flow versus TPS, it's highly nonlinear here. And you can see that obviously this calibration you would need some adjustment to bring it in to be consistent with this engine. But you can see that, again, as you get it right in one location, it moves to be right in the other graph, and that should give you some confidence that you're doing the right thing. So anyway, that's an example of just using the having an alpha N. The other thing you can do, you can turn this off for a second. You can graph another channel. Like if you're interested in graphing something other than the fuel flow or VE, like this is a channel for cell torque. Actually, I just noticed it still says fuel flow there. I need to change that. But you can see that for different engine speeds, and the blue and green lines went away because they're meaningless in this context. Oh, it did update. Okay, so I guess you have to update it once before the axis titles will change. So this is cell torque versus manifold pressure for a given RPM. In this case, we're at 1600 RPM, so you can see that there's a fairly linear relationship between torque and manifold pressure. And let's see, yeah, so some different RPMs, you see some different responses. But this is a good case of visualizing the difference between sort of steady state and transient data. So you can see here that the steady state data is along this line that I'm traversing with my mouse, but this sort of big loop that it's drawing here is the speeding up, or I shouldn't say speeding up, giving it more throttle and getting out of the throttle on the same RPM point. So when you're increasing in throttle, you have a larger map for the same torque, and when you're decreasing in throttle, you have a larger torque for the same map, however you want to think of it. But you can see visually for all of the RPMs, especially here where it's nice and steady, there should be a decent linear relationship, and that you can, for instance, not trust these points. So if you want to erase them, if you want to throw them out, and the process of data pruning, so that your other data, your VE, and the other things that you're trying to fit make more sense. You can do that. But that pretty much covers the main tab for now. So we'll move on to something else.